Now, it's always good to read what is written at the top of a psalm. It says here, David wrote this psalm in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of Saul and from his enemies. You see at the head of Psalm 18. So when I read something like that, I go back to say, how was that? Let me turn back to 1 Samuel. This is how you can study the Bible too. We read in 1 Samuel and how Saul was chasing after David in 1 Samuel 23. And verse 19, the enemies of David came to Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 23. These Old Testament history is very interesting. Verse 19. The Ziphites came up to Saul and said, hey, by the way, you're looking for David, right? David is hiding with us in our territory, in the strongholds at Horesh. We saw him on the hill of Hakilah. I'll tell you the exact location is south of Jeshimon. 1 Samuel 23:19. Now then, O king, come and do whatever you want. We will help to surrender David into your hand, and you can cut off his head or do whatever you like. And Saul was so happy. May you be blessed of the Lord that you're going to help me cut off his head. Can you imagine what an evil man Saul was? Go now and make sure. Investigate. See his place, where his haunt is. And when you've seen him, I'm told he's very cunning. So look and learn about all the hiding places. Verse 23, where he hides himself. Come back and tell me definitely, and I will go with you, and I will search him out. And they rose and went. And David, verse 24, were in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul and his men went to seek him. And they told David, and he came down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. And Saul went on one side of the mountain and David on the other side of the mountain, because David was trying to, verse 26, to get away from Saul. And the messenger came to Saul and said, hurry. So Saul stopped pursuing. See how God protected David. Some Philistines came and attacked him that side. Okay, he defeated the Philistines, and now it's amazing how God protected David. And then chapter 24 verse 1, Saul came back. He says, I'm still going to hunt for David. And somebody told him chapter 24 verse 1, he's in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So he took 3,000 men to hunt for one man. And he came to the sheepfolds. And listen to this. Verse 3. There was a cave there. And Saul went into the cave to relieve himself. Alone. And he didn't realize inside that cave, David and his men were sitting there in the inner recesses of that cave. And one of the men of David said to him, hey, David, this is the day which the Lord said, I will deliver your enemy into your hand. There he is. Just take your spear and pierce it through him, or take this dagger and finish him off. And that'll be the end of his reign and you can be the king. And David said, no. But when Saul was resting there or whatever he was doing, David went to a corner and just sliced off a small part of Saul's robe. I mean, such a small part that Saul didn't even wake up. And just cutting off that robe, David's conscience bothered him. Verse 5. See, when we think of David and Jesus calling himself the son of David, we say, how in the world can Jesus call him the son of a man who committed adultery with Bathsheba and had 7 wives and murdered Bathsheba's husband and married her? I'll tell you, he slipped up. There's no doubt David slipped up in moments of weakness. He slipped up in that moment when he saw Bathsheba. It wasn't a regular habit of his, but he wasn't going around raping every woman he saw, but he slipped up once, and when he was caught in that situation, he tried to cover it up he didn't kill her husband himself, but say, okay, told the general, let him go up in front, and yeah, it wasn't straightforward. He slipped up, no doubt. But basically, This verse tells me he had a conscience. He would not kill, even if he is going to be a king thereby. He was convicted when he cut a small part of Saul's robe. And then he told his men, verse 7, no, don't kill him. We can't touch the Lord's anointed. The last part of verse 10, I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. There's a verse in the Old Testament which says, the Lord says, don't touch my anointed, don't do my prophets any harm. It's a very dangerous thing to raise your hand against the Lord's anointed or your words. And so finally David decided Saul must know that I could have killed him. So he comes out of the cave and he stood before David. He stood before Saul and said, verse 9, why are you listening to the words of people who say, I'm trying to harm you? Here, do you see this piece of your robe? I could have killed you right now when you came into my hands inside the cave. And people told me to kill you, but I didn't. I said, I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed, verse 10. And Saul felt so ashamed of himself. Verse 22, Saul went home. It says here in verse 16, he even wept. And we read later on, another time, again, chapter 26, a second time. And David was hiding, chapter 26, verse 1. And Saul arose again with 3,000 men. This is after he was spared once before. And David heard, verse 4, that Saul was coming. So David arose and came to the place where Saul had camped, and they were all asleep. It was at night. And David said to one of his soldiers, who will go down with me to Saul? And they were all sleeping, Saul's army there, 3,000 of them. And David and Abishai, verse 7, chapter 26, verse 7, came to Saul's army by night. And Saul was sleeping inside the circle of the camp. And Saul's spear was stuck in the ground near his head. And Abner said, today God has delivered your enemy. If you don't want to kill him, Abner said, let me take this spear and strike it with one stroke and I'll fix him to this ground. He won't get up. David said, no. Again, the same words, verse 9. Who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be without guilt? Remember those words. Be very careful, my brothers and sisters. Be careful who you speak against. Be careful who you stretch out your tongue against. Will you be without guilt? That's what made David a man after God's own heart. He made mistakes like all of us make mistakes. He slipped up in adultery as well. But he had a sensitive conscience most of the time. And God saw that. He would not grab for himself. And he says, if the Lord wants me to kill him, the Lord will strike him one day. But I will not do it. And so David took the spear, verse 12, Saul's spear and the jug of water, and went away. And everybody was fast asleep. And then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the mountain, and he shouted out, Abner, aren't you supposed to take care of the king? Somebody came to kill your king. See where his spear is. See where his jug of water is. It's with me. Here it is. And Saul again recognized David's voice. Is that you, David? Verse 17. David says, yes, it is me. Then Saul said, verse 21, I have sinned. Please return my son David. I know one day you will be the king. So, when that happened, that's when David wrote Psalm 18. And what did he read in Psalm 18? With the kind, the Lord will show himself kind. That guy tried to kill me, but I let him go. Again he came after me. I let him go. Take that example, my brothers, this year. Somebody's coming after you. Forgive him. The Lord will protect you. He's kind to those who are kind. Don't remember all the wrong things they did against you. Forgive. Let this be a year when we sow seeds of forgiveness. That doesn't mean you shouldn't correct your children when they grow up. You don't love your child if you don't